Hello.
Our story begins inside the High Council chambers on Coruscant. Obi Wan Kenobi was just finishing up his debriefing of a mission that he'd be undertaking to protect the Supreme Chancellor from a plot to capture him. Moralo Eval was one of several separatist bounty hunters with goals and motives to take down Sheev Palpatine. None of these plots would ever result in the Chancellor's death, but they were designed by the Sith Lord to tear the Jedi away from the Republic as well as Skywalker from the Order. Again, the Council was playing into Palpatine's hands. Obi-Wan suggested taking on a mission where he would openly be killed by a blaster wound and then transformed into a bounty hunter. As he was going over the details of this operation, Master Windu interrupted him. There was a key piece to all of this that Master Kenobi was continuously glossing over. Mace asked, what would be the response from Skywalker? It was both a valid and important question. The Master of the Order knew that Anakin's attachments could come into play here. Obi-Wan explained that his former student's reaction to his death would sell everything. It was, in Kenobi's mind, the key to making sure that his death seemed realistic. Mace leaned back in his chair and stroked his chin, as Obi-Wan continued through the rest of his plan. Master Plo on the other side of the room believed this was a sound idea, concurring with Master Mundi that they should go forward with it. Before Yoda would willingly sign off on the mission, he asked Mace if there was something else he would like to say, and the Master of the Order nodded. He tried his best to understand the actions and rationale behind the motivations of those inside the Order. Anakin was always a sore spot for Mace, because he acted unlike any other member of the Order. However, Skywalker's unpredictability was cause for concern. Sure, Anakin's reaction to Obi-Wan's death would sell people's belief that Kenobi died, but there were some things to also consider. Firstly, how many people would actually be around Anakin and Obi-Wan during this death? If it were only a few Republic citizens, which that was being generous because this was supposed to take place in the lower levels, would said citizens be able to denounce what they saw publicly? Probably not. The Undercity was a bad part of Coruscant, but not every single soul saw death firsthand. They might not know how to respond to Master Kenobi being shot. Therefore, there would be no reason to quote-unquote sell his death. Secondly, and this was perhaps the most important point to Mace, was how Skywalker might respond. Anakin was an emotional Jedi, more so than most of his peers. Obi-Wan claimed to know his former apprentice, but this seemed like a bad idea. What would Anakin's reaction be after he found out his teacher lied to him? Windu understood that for a typical Jedi, they might be more empathetic with the scenario or situation, but Anakin wasn't someone that Obi-Wan should cross like that. He already had his problems with the Council, valid or not, and this would only drive a wedge further into that relationship. Master Windu then thirdly suggested that this operation become Anakin's. He was a very capable Jedi Knight. His relationship with the Order might not be completely severed by lying to him, but this also might be a way for the Council to form a closer bond with Anakin. Mace told Obi-Wan to instead bring Anakin to their chambers, pending anyone else inside the room having an issue with this stance. After it was spoken out, no one really disagreed with Mace. He brought up some irrefutable truths about young Skywalker. It wouldn't be worth their time to just hurt him and then act like they didn't. It wasn't said aloud, but Mace expected better from Master Kenobi. His previous line of thought was quite foolish. While the idea for Obi-Wan to do the mission wasn't solely his, it was his decision to keep Anakin in the dark. After the council session concluded, Master Kenobi would break the idea to Anakin, and he'd be, of course, willing to do it. Instead of keeping everyone he loved in the dark, he told Ahsoka and told Padme and designed an entire operation to make his death look even less planned. The council chose to go with Anakin as a result, and he was set to become Rako Hardeen. As planned, a squad of 5 Jedi would descend into the lower levels, with Anakin dying in front of all of them. But everyone knew the truth, and as Mace initially hypothesized, no one was actually around these Jedi when Anakin was shot, meaning that the need for a public reaction from Obi-Wan's original plan was pretty needless. Sure, when Anakin was confirmed dead, there were people around him, but for the initial reaction, Windu's logic continued to prevail. Those people didn't 1. Know the Jedi enough to gauge their reactions, and 2. Weren't familiar enough with death in such a circumstance to focus on the emotions of another individual. All of that led Anakin to forming a relationship with Moralo Eval inside the Republic military complex prison. The Jedi planned everything out perfectly, enough so that Anakin had no issue going in and building his alliance, and then escaping during a prison break. Did it come with Anakin stabbing a shark man and fighting a 12-year-old Boba Fett? Yeah, but not a big deal. Wait, he's 12 here? As an important note, due to Anakin's missing appendage in metallic replacement, the Jedi outfitted him with a new metallic forearm, one built just for him. It matched his regular arm, but it was toned and colored the same way his skin was. So while he'd be wearing gloves anyways, he'd at least have the benefit of human-looking arms. It was one of his favorite things about this mission, something he didn't even consider personally. He was so used to not having his former arm by this point, but it was just kind of nice to see it look fleshy. Thanks to breaking out with the sleazy Moralo Eval and the ever so intolerant Cad Bane, Anakin had to be just as conniving and convincing. But remember, he was born on Tatooine. He knew how to walk and talk just like any other no-good piece of work around the galaxy. Playing the part of Rako Hardeen was like second nature to him. In a way, he got to pretend he was what he would have been had Qui-Gon never discovered him. Yet very quickly, especially during their trip from Coruscant to Nal Hutta, did Anakin grow very impatient with Cad Bane. The Darrow's bounty hunter just couldn't keep his eyes off of Anakin. He was so convinced that Rako was some kind of traitor. There was something weird and Cad couldn't put his finger on it. While this would have happened regardless of Obi Wan or Anakin leading the operation, the former would have been far more patient. Anakin, though, grew up around these types. Maybe he didn't know Cad Bane personally, but he understood the mindset of someone like him. He'd act a certain way until they could pull the trigger, and Cad Bane would pull that trigger. He was one of the most renowned bounty hunters in the galaxy, perhaps the greatest gunslinger too, especially now that Jango was dead. If Anakin wanted to survive this mission, he needed to be wary of Cad's every action. That actually, surprisingly, bubbled to a head at Nal Hutta, while they were trying to escape a band of Hutt thugs. In this situation, Obi Wan would have looked for compromise. Anakin, though, knew this was his moment to dispose of a ruthless bounty hunter, one he already had plenty of a grudge against for threatening both Padme and Ahsoka. As Cad turned around preparing to kick Anakin into the dirt off of their ship, the Jedi Knight flung his hand outwards, using the Force to tear apart Cad Bane's tubes, sending the tubes flailing out into the open. It didn't totally hurt Cad, and it also wouldn't kill him. These tubes were installed to protect him from Force attacks, more so in the case of a Force choke, not necessarily the Force breaking the tubes. It was a shock attack, because even if Cad believed there was a reason to be suspicious of Rako, he most certainly didn't come to the conclusion that Hardeen was a Jedi. In this, Cad Bane fell backwards, after losing his balance in surprise. His hands flooded towards his face as a reaction, trying to fix the tubes, but Anakin went straight for the throat. With his apparently bare hand, Anakin planted it down against Bane's neck. All the gears inside of his metallic arm squeezed tighter. Before Cad knew it, he couldn't breathe. Skywalker didn't have a chance to enjoy this, so he pressed harder and harder. Bane's reactions turned towards defense as he started flinging his arms and legs, but Anakin's metallic appendage was too much. It killed the bounty hunter with enough of a squeeze, and Skywalker kicked Cad's body down the stairs as the ramp closed up, and he and Moralo could escape this hellhole. Thanks to the transparency between the Jedi, Skywalker didn't need to worry about anyone trailing him. As for Moralo, he didn't really care that Cad Bane was dead, to be honest. He was really surprised that Bane lost to a no-name Rako Hardeen, but honestly, who cares? Moralo needed the most capable bounty hunters in the galaxy for this mission, so if Cad died to Rako, then clearly he wasn't capable. All roads, though, led to the box. Eval and Count Dooku needed a competent strike team of bounty hunters to carry out this mission against the Supreme Chancellor. This wasn't the only time the box had been used outside of Castle Sereno, and surely it wouldn't be the last. But it would be yet another chance for Rako Hardeen to prove himself as a capable bounty hunter. The tragedy is, too, the real Rako would have certainly died during the past few days of these events. Anakin, though, like his master would have too, was beyond capable. Surviving the box required intelligence and strategy. Despite Anakin not giving a care in the galaxy for these bounty hunters, he was very capable of working in a team setting with them. He functioned really well around them. That also came from his background on Tatooine. They all got through challenges, helped each other live, and benefited off of his Jedi intuition and processing skills. Skywalker at the end of the day was the reason those who survived would see the other side of the box. Yet it should be said, there was another wrinkle of change to the dynamic of this mission. Anakin, before the mission started, knew that the key to all of this was Moralo Eval. Now that he could literally see Count Dooku was behind the plot against the Supreme Chancellor, Anakin knew that there was something else, one very important thing. Eval was expendable. So when Count Dooku pinned Rako Hardeen and Moralo Eval against each other, Anakin didn't only just win, he exterminated the bounty hunter by beating him nearly to death before throwing him into the flames to burn alive. It was a little cathartic for Anakin. He did enjoy beating an opponent like Eval to death because it meant he was protecting his friend, the Chancellor. Anakin also understood now how easily his power could grow out of control. When acting under the guise of a Jedi, it's easy for one to forget the reality of one's actions. It's part of the reason he could move on from the Tusken slaughter so easily. He said it to himself. He was a Jedi. He knew he was better than that. As a Jedi, that title carried weight. But he couldn't just fall back on the Jedi excuse right now because he was technically a bounty hunter. He had to continue being Rako Hardeen. No, he didn't regret killing Cad or Moralo. They were both scum that deserved it, but the method of which he killed them, both, left him uneasy. It reminded him of how difficult it was to be a Jedi. That legacy, the code, and everything that came with the imagery was completely different than this. He was praised for brutality, for murdering someone that was supposed to be his boss. Now Anakin was in charge of the operation to kidnap Chancellor Palpatine. Working beside Count Dooku was infuriating to say the least. The man was a nuisance. He always walked around so easily with a sadistic grin and a sense of knowing how to control everything he was. Due to helping Tyrannus craft up the plan to get the Chancellor captured, and having to rework most of it because of Moralo's death, Skywalker was able to get a better understanding of the entire situation. Of course, the operation wasn't the main focus for the young Jedi Knight. He had some ideas that Dooku quite liked, that made the actual intention of the mission seem very plausible. Tyrannus may have had an odd feeling about Rako, but because Anakin committed to the bit as best as he could, it was hard for Dooku to just accuse Skywalker of being something he clearly wasn't. This close bond for the purpose of capturing Palpatine allowed Anakin a chance to predict one of 3 locations that Dooku could be during the event. It also permitted him a chance to load his weapon up with unlimited shots rather than one, and remove any listening devices that Dooku may have tried to install. It was the greatest benefit of killing Moralo. Tyrannus and Eval would have at some point grown cautious of Rako and planted a microphone in his weapon's case. Dooku didn't have the time to do that with Rako involved in every conversation about the mission. The constant communication between Skywalker and the Jedi Temple permitted the Order a chance to quietly dispatch a dozen Jedi to Naboo to prepare for Dooku. The main point of emphasis was capturing him. They were all stationed around the 3 locations that Anakin expected the Count to station himself at. When it came time for Rako to be in position, Skywalker was left with a judgment call. The Jedi knew the entire plan. They knew which bounty hunter was which and how they planned to conceal themselves. It also came with the Jedi intentionally swapping out Senate commandos and Coruscant guards for members of the 187th. Windu's clone unit was wearing their shiny purple armor, and they positioned themselves around the Chancellor. Palpatine didn't care for the aesthetic of it, but that didn't matter. What he wanted at the end of the day did not matter. This was a Jedi operation to protect him. Skywalker, because Palpatine began his speech, abandoned his post and rushed for the locations he expected to find Dooku at. To his surprise, the Count would be hiding inside the Palace of Theed. All the lights were out, and truthfully speaking, he wasn't really expecting Rako to just pull out a lightsaber and attack him inside the royal dining room. Dooku quickly rose to his feet to defend himself from Anakin, as the Magna Guards activated inside the room. Mace Windu rushed in behind Skywalker and broke those droids down with his fists. Tyrannus was very confused by Rako Hardeen before him. He just couldn't put it together, until he tried to hit Anakin and his metallic forearm caught him and twisted him backwards. Then it all became clear. Dooku defended himself, as Anakin, then Mace behind him, charged. Since this was a one-way exit type of room, Dooku would have to fight across the entire chamber to get out of it. As he looked down the table, he could see 2 temple guards activate their pikes at the end of the room. They were all stationed, waiting for Anakin to pounce. Dooku turned back towards Skywalker and jabbed at him. Mace leapt over the 2 duelists and backed his saber in towards Dooku. It was a really awkward but precise strike, and it was intended as such. The curve and twist of Windu's saber strike pushed into Dooku's defense, as the Master of Form 2 batted away each of his overly aggressive Jedi opponents. At the same time, because the Temple Guard confirmed that Skywalker was out of position, the Jedi moved in on the Chancellor. It resulted in the immediate capture of the entire bounty hunter force, without the Chancellor being apprehended by any of them. Also, should be said that because Cad Bane died and Moralo wasn't around to plan the mission, it was always destined to be a complete and total failure. Dooku, on the other hand, fell into the table, bending his ribs over the corner and wheezing painfully. Anakin shoved the fallen Jedi back harder, before stepping back and kicking Dooku's knee. Mace rolled in, deflecting the next 2 strikes from the Count, and then removing his weapon. Mace pulled the curved hilt from Tyrannus' hand, and rolled it into a reverse grip, shoving both sabers towards Dooku's neck and demanding that he yield. Anakin stepped back, watching the Master of the Order at work. Maybe he wanted to continue fighting, but Dooku surrendered. He had been outmatched by his former friend. Before the end of the ceremony, with the Chancellor currently under protection, the Jedi quietly and discreetly transported Count Dooku off of Naboo and returned him to the Jedi Temple, where he would be kept. Mace, following the duel, would congratulate Anakin for all of the hard work he did during the mission. He continuously proved himself to be beyond capable with nearly any challenge that the war threw at him. Mace wanted Anakin to get the procedure to return back to his normal state. Then Mace himself would escort the Chancellor back home. Anakin was surprised by the Jedi Master's quickness to try and abandon Naboo, but Mace had a date with the Galactic Senate, Wartime Affairs Committee, before Palpatine could return to the capital. Master Windu's discussion with this branch of the Senate was entirely built around making sure Count Dooku remained in the custody of the Jedi Order. Not to say that the Council distrusted the Republic, but they actually knew what Dooku was, that being a Sith. So Mace went to them with the proposition that they would inform the Republic that the clones apprehended Count Dooku at a failed abduction of the Supreme Chancellor on Naboo. Dooku, since then, had been placed into a maximum security prison on Coruscant, which then keeps the Senate honest with the Republic. The Jedi, because their temple had not been a target of the Separatists during the war, could provide any intel to the Republic throughout the incarceration of the Count of Sereno. The committee actually agreed to do this. While Palpatine's input was important to most of them, they genuinely believed the Supreme Chancellor would go for it, because strategically it made sense. It was what Mace was hoping for by getting here early. Obviously, once Palpatine returned and learned the truth, he would request a transfer for Dooku to a maximum security prison, but by the time that request went through, it seemed almost pointless. The Jedi had proven themselves as capable of disrupting the Count, so why wouldn't they succeed with keeping him concealed from the CIS? It was a no-brainer. All CIS strategists would assume another military-based complex on Coruscant, rather than the temple. Anyways, it provided a better chance for the Republic to applaud itself for the capture of Dooku and demand that the Confederacy surrender, so that peace could return to the galaxy. An official state response from Raxus would take a few weeks to reach the Republic. While the Confederacy prepared their counter to Dooku's capture, Anakin returned to regular combat. He bonded with Master Windu during their duel against Dooku, plus he felt closer overall to the High Council, because they'd proven that they trusted him, rather than lied to him about his master's death. It was a trust that now went both ways. The Council knew that they could put their faith in the Skywalker, and he wouldn't just bring back positive results, but he'd go above and beyond. Again, Mace didn't want to know how Moralo or Cad Bane died, but the fact that Skywalker killed two of the galaxy's most ruthless bounty hunters and then helped capture Dooku was impressive to say the least. But it was, at the end of the day, another mission. The fate of the war hinged on the reaction from the Confederacy. Their parliament was hurting. Dooku's capture was a dagger to the heart of their very chambers. And it was eerily similar to the effect that Mina Bontiri's death had on the Confederacy. Dooku was the rallying cry of the CIS. He was the reason they were all together inside that parliament structure on Raxus Secundus. This, at the end though, was his dream brought to a reality. In collaboration with Palpatine's activation of the Separatist Reserve Military, the government attempted to rally a strike on the Republic capital to extract their leader. Sidious was obviously furious behind closed doors. He didn't even know how it was possible for Dooku to fail so badly. But at the same time, it was even more promising that young Skywalker was as capable as he had just proven himself to be. The Dark Lord of the Sith then designed a strategy to ensure the Separatists made a power move against the Republic. The basis of his plans were to make sure the CIS stayed afloat, while his muse was sitting in prison inside the Jedi Temple. General Grievous was given a number of tasks to prepare for a raid on Coruscant. It was a very easy way to streamline all of his influence. Sidious had to rely on CIS manpower to keep the war looking favorable in the eyes of the Parliament. But there was an immediate problem. Amplifying the war effort did not pacify resistance inside the Separatist Parliament. The moment Dooku was gone, the core of the Confederacy started to buckle. Truthfully, the government wanted to win, but more than that, they craved their independence. With battle droids rolling across the streets of neutral and Republic planets, the CIS looked bound to win through war. But there also could be simultaneously another truth. Even if the Confederacy was winning battles, taking territory and overwhelming Republic troops with their reserve forces, leadership inside the Parliament was weak, and that's where Sidious's real problem started to grow. Palpatine's focus was widespread. Without his most important cog on the other side of the war, he focused on a political replacement. Never did he think that the overly cowardly Newt Gunray would waltz into the CIS Parliament and demand their attention. To clarify, this was not a misstep on Palpatine's part. He was focused on trying to get the War Affairs Committee to move Dooku to an off-Coruscant location so that he could be abducted and brought back into power, but that was failing tremendously. Additionally, Sidious was adding 3 new politicians to the CIS Parliament, in the hopes that one of them could replace Dooku as frontrunners in the government. At the same time, because of the doubling of CIS battle droids in active combat, Sidious had to make sure that Anakin didn't accidentally end up dead. And lastly, Grievous's aggression had to be mitigated, because he could go off the rails and get everyone killed. There simply were too many things to focus on at the same time, and because he couldn't focus specifically on every single session inside the CIS Parliament while maintaining his own Republic Senate, he completely missed Newt Gunray. The Viceroy of the Trade Federation appeared at the perfect moment for himself, but perhaps the worst for the Confederacy. This came about 5 weeks after Dooku's capture and the activation of the CIS Reserve Military, which pushed new troops and battleships into Republic territory but also neutral territory. Newt walked into the Separatist government building, demanding attention, but the problem was their morale. They weren't struggling because of their victories, but because they had no solution. There was a growing fear from populations that lived under Confederacy rule that their military might have gone too far, and what did that mean for them when the war ended? The CIS was formed by people trying to escape corruption. But what about military occupation? General Grievous was showing everyone, not just the Republic, but everyone, that a Separatist victory would be done with total domination. Without the leadership of Count Dooku, there was no guarantee that Grievous would just be contained. It wasn't as much of an ethics conversation either, to be clear. The fear was how the incredibly powerful General Grievous would be controlled if Dooku wasn't around to do so. The government was struggling with that already. They wanted the Count freed from prison, but what Grievous was doing was far beyond their demands, especially because he attacked neutral territory. That's why Newt Gunray's arrival was a total dagger to the Separatist government. People turned a blind eye to the Federation's involvement. The battle droids were protecting them, but Gunray was a known maniac, someone who voluntarily attacked a sovereign planet only 12 years ago because of a tax dispute. He rolled in with Magna Guards and a threat that didn't present itself in such a manner. The politicians of the CIS knew what he was trying to do, even though he never tried to come off as a direct threat to their efforts of governance. Gunray was simply putting his name in for leader of their parliament. Everyone inside the government knew that it wasn't a simple request, it was an order. So a government, already worried about losing control, learned the truth about their leadership. It only went so far without Dooku in the room, and slowly a plan was devised inside their ranks. Gunray's ascension was already, from their standpoint, seemingly inevitable, so why not have something ready to counter it when that day of his rise comes to an end? While the Jedi continued to fight the good fight, the Confederacy did give in. Gunray rose to power, but the fight against the Republic, even with their overwhelming numbers, stopped seeing continuous success. The CIS kept Newt's ascension a secret to the public, because they didn't want the populace of their resistance to see them as frauds, resistance being that against the Republic. This was a two-parter for their government. The Confederacy kept Gunray's rise a secret strategically, which Gunray agreed with. It wouldn't benefit them inside the parliament to tell everyone who their new leader was. Newt Gunray believed that this was done so that he wouldn't be captured like Dooku was. Politically for the government, they were just covering their backs for when they betrayed him. The second part to this thinking of keeping him a secret was that it would isolate Gunray inside the government and leave him weak to usurpers. The Confederacy only wanted independence. Now that Dooku was clearly gone, their best chance for that was taking over the actual military themselves by removing Gunray and Grievous in the process and then ending the conflict. Newt's isolation inside the parliament allowed Separatist leaders the chance to go behind his lines, even in the process recruit an assortment of smugglers or bounty hunters to help them gain access to the Trade Federation's battle droids. Throughout the Separatist resistance to itself, the Jedi and clones fought daily. The Jedi Council kept Darth Sidious off guard by falsely moving Dooku to the spire on Stjon Prime. It was a deceptive move to help them analyze potential Separatist loyalists within the Republic. This didn't lead them directly to Palpatine, but he was many of the individuals on their list. What they did was send a dozen Republic escort ships to the Jedi Temple. Then they'd be dispatched to Stjon Prime to quote-unquote relocate Dooku. They never moved him from his cell, but when the spire was attacked by the Confederacy only a day later, they knew that someone inside the War Affairs Committee, or the Chancellor's office, worked for the CIS. At the same time, they fought for the Republic. Because of the overwhelming attacks from General Grievous, Satine was forced to bridge the Republic in neutral systems because Grievous went off script. It's part of the reason the CIS was so insistent on self-sabotaging their own war effort. They were destroying any future relationships they could have with the galaxy. Unfortunately for Dooku, Grievous, and Sidious, not everyone was nearly as sinister as them. The intentions of the CIS was honorable, and for the Jedi, they didn't see that until it all ended on the battlefield on one random day. Across several fronts, whether they be in space or on the ground, the war just ended, for the most part. There were other battle droid types from the Techno Union or Commerce Guild, but the Federation held a majority of the droid forces, and it showed on the battlefield. Droids, like they did on Naboo, simply shut down and stopped firing. Now to clarify, this was not an official surrender. This was a hostile takeover of their own lost government. On the front lines, it was pure confusion. Inside the halls of the Parliament building, Gunray was apprehended by his own battle droids. A procession from the chamber walked out to announce their resolution to the Clone War. They no longer wanted to fight. They used Newt Gunray as an example of why peace was necessary. It was a total shock to the galaxy because, to many, the Confederacy was the reason the war started. But this was from their government directly. No more Dooku, no more Gunray, no more Grievous. This was them, to the people, peace. They recognized and even explained that wartime reparations could be arranged by their government, but no longer would they allow the warmongering to continue. Dooku would stay with the Republic, and they would end the war because it had gone too far. Inside the Senate Rotunda on Coruscant, debates ensued, but strong voices demanding for an end to the war, both because of casualties, but also that this was their opportunity to get away with more sway in the treaty. If the Republic encouraged the beginning of the war again, or for it to continue, then they wouldn't be able to force the treaty to work in their favor. This was a post-war where the CIS unleashed a reserve force outnumbering the clones double than what it was after Geonosis. They attacked the Republic and even the Neutral Systems Coalition. This was a smart move by the Republic politically. So while the government came to its solutions about how to arrange finances and trade following the conclusion of the war, the Jedi continued their investigation into who might be a separatist, or at this point, a Gunray loyalist. The War Affairs Committee didn't have anyone with any connection back to the Viceroy, so eventually, after continuous searching, they landed on the Supreme Chancellor. It took months from the Stjon Prime experiment to the end of the peace treaty process for the Jedi to disappear Palpatine. He was stuck in a bind because Grievous was somewhere beyond his knowledge after the war ended because of the Confederacy, and Order 66 simply wasn't a choice for him. Palpatine was considering the executive order that would target the Republic, but his problem always was his lack of control. He couldn't stop the overwhelming number of battle droids. If he could, sure, he would disappear the Senate or the Jedi and become the sole ruler of the Republic. But that wasn't the case here, because the Confederacy apprehended all of Newt Gunray's assets. So Palpatine was stuck playing 4D chess without half the pieces. Eventually, he was always bound to lose. Palpatine's disappearance strategically came after the Republic overwhelmingly voted in favor of a peace treaty. Thanks to the Republic uniting with the Neutral Systems Coalition, giving every neutral system equal voting power, due to a request from Satine when they joined their forces, it meant that the widespread Republic was more willing to vote on peace rather than the original Republic. The Confederacy was a total mess on the other hand, but they were willing to try. Gunray was dealt with, Grievous was destroyed, and the droid armies were being reconfigured for defense but also reconstruction. This was the period where the governments of the galaxy pretended that they learned their lessons and tried to be normal for a moment, but the wounds and scars of the Clone War would remain. The CIS, though, was committed to genuine change. They, without Dooku, were free to act as they wished. In collaboration with the Republic, they started to break the Federation down and use its assets to help with the rebuilding process. Inside the Jedi Order, Anakin, the person responsible for the insane butterfly effect that captured the entire galaxy, reached the rank of Master. His life inside the Order for the rest of his life would be beautiful. He'd ascend as both a swordsman and also a Force user. He'd find himself in the ranks of the Council, and while he didn't directly end Palpatine's life, he'd be a part of the reason the Sith religion never returned, and also integral to maintaining peace between the Republic and the Confederacy in the future. In the process of maintaining trust between the Council and the Chosen One, the Masters of the Jedi High Council completely redirected the fate of the galaxy. Sure, due to the intensity of the Separatist movement following Dooku's capture, there were more immediate deaths, but those deaths were not in vain. The era of peace that followed the Clone War might have prospered under two separate factions, but it, like the balance of the Force, would exist for far longer than the peace times that came before the Clone War. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the Patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Sith Clone Wars out on Saturday. Let's talk about this story. This story is really two parts. So first part is all about the Rako Hardeen arc. I rewatched it the other day. I watched through the whole thing and I was like, damn, why'd they do that though? Not telling Anakin, really dumb idea. So putting him in place of Obi Wan made sense here. I also saw while watching through it that Obi Wan made a lot of Jedi-like decisions that I don't think Anakin would do. I think he would be a lot more free to act as a bounty hunter in this scenario. I think he would see like killing Cad Bane on Nal Hutta as a necessary option because Cad Bane has been disruptive to the Jedi. You know, I think he would see killing Moralo Eval as a way to have more success during his mission to capture the Chancellor. That's really why I wanted to have those switch-ups, because I think Anakin would just honestly take the mission as a bounty hunter. Not saying he's unnecessary or cruel, I think he would just see opportunities within those specific deaths. As for the total reaction, obviously Dooku being captured is a big deal, and I kind of wanted to spend the time focusing on the result inside the Separatists. I think the Separatist organization, or the Parliament, is really based on how Dooku is acting. They seem really in line with him, except for the whole Mina Bontiri thing, and we don't really revisit Raxus, but it seems apparent that they kind of rally around him post Mina Bontiri's death, and this is post her death, and I felt it made sense for them to be almost lost without him, and that their morale would be a little shot. Like, they activate the droid reserve military, they don't capture Dooku, and then Nute Gunray with this full reserve military activated just waltzes in there. Of course, their morale is going to continue to shrink, but I don't think they, like the Republic, would just let someone like Gunray take over. I think they'd be ready to stab him in the back the second he tried to go for it. And it would come off as self-sabotage, but at the end of the day, the Confederacy is really built around trying to get independence. That's really their thing, and I don't see a scenario where they'd rather have a General Grievous that's warmongering out of control on the loose, with Nute Gunray in control of their government, than just being the losers of a war but still having their independence. I think they would just choose that latter option like 99 times out of 100, because it is what they want, and maybe not the most economically stable one, but the most independent one. So I hope you all enjoyed this kind of like broken up two-part story, but I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.